Hey gang, welcome. It's Friday, and I thought I get asked all the time if I was going to read one of your books, which one should I start with? So what I thought I'd do today, just got done working out, I'm cooling off. I thought I'd run through some of these. I'm going to start with my horror stories, okay? And there are two horror series. They're both anthologies, and then I have a paranormal thriller. The first series is called The Box Under the Bed, okay? And these are good-sized books, a couple hundred pages each. And the second series is the Dark Passages series. These are smaller books, more like a novella, okay? And I'm going to go through them both very quickly, give you my thoughts about some of the stories, and maybe, give an anecdote or two about where they came from. So let's start with The Box Under the Bed. So what happened here was I used to have a blog, and I would talk about author things and interact with people, and there was other authors who would comment, and I'd comment on their posts. And I would give story writing tips, and whatever I learned in the business, I would tell other people. So it was great for that. We had a lot of authors who were there. And what started to happen was I would get comments about, you should have a writing contest. You should have a writing contest. And I was like, I don't know anything about having a writing contest, but they taught me into it. Got sponsors, we got prizes, and it started small, and I got bigger and bigger each year. And we did it like once a year. And so they said, you should have a theme. And so we said, well, okay, it'll be fun. So at the time I was writing mysteries and thrillers, and so were a lot of my author friends. So I said, let's do this. Excuse me. I said, let's do this. I'll have all the readers, everybody contribute a story, we'll have a theme. And at that time, the theme was horror. Excuse me, I'm going to get a sip of tea or I'm going to keep coughing. Now, not horror like prostitutes, horror like scary, okay? Which I know you knew, but it's still worth clarifying. Okay, so we had a writing contest, and man, the stories were so good. So when we were done, I said, we should do something with all these stories, and that's what happened with The Box Under the Bed. Everybody who contributed a story that won a prize or that I really liked a lot, I said, you know what, let's put all these together in a collection. So in this first, and we called the series The Box Under the Bed. So if you go to Amazon, you search for The Box Under the Bed, horror anthology series, there's going to be, I think, 6 books in that series. They're all short stories, and these are good-sized books, like I said, a couple hundred pages. So here's the deal. The first book that came out was really a way for me to recognize the people who won the contest. These were all stories that friends of mine put in that I enjoyed. So there's a few other my fellow author friends are in here, and I contributed one story, which is gosh, what's it called? Mrs. Billin, The Death of Mrs. Billin, okay? And The Death of Mrs. Billin is a short piece from my paranormal thriller, which is called A Place of Shadows. If you buy the ebook, it's called A Place of Shadows. If you buy the paperback, it might still be called An Angel on Her Shoulder. Honestly, I'll have to check. I put it out a while ago, and I never switched the title and a lot of things. Okay, so in this one, The Death of Mrs. Billin. Now, I like the stories in here a lot. That's why they're in here. There's some best-selling author friends of mine. USA Today best-selling author friends of mine put stories in here. Some other friends, some of them are humorous, some of them are scary, etc. So that's the one here. And my story in this is The Death of Mrs. Billin. It's a really good story, and that's why it's in the paranormal thriller. The second book in that series is called Dark Visions. So each year we would have this contest. I, again, asked my author friends to write a short story for the series, and the people who won the writing contest would be in it, and that's what this is. So this is the second book in the Box Under the Bed series. And for this one, I wrote the prologue, which is called Now Comes Death, and then I wrote a story called The Corner Shop. Now, remember that one, okay? Then I think I wrote the epilogue, yes, which is basically Now Comes Death Part 2. Just a personal little anecdote. Now Comes Death is when my brother was diagnosed with cancer, and he was terminal. He was going to die, and I wrote a story about a man who gets visited by his brother, and basically he visits his brother rather, and then that night he's staying in a hotel and it's storming out, and he gets visited by a ghostly visitor, and he's trying to figure out, is this the gatekeeper to the great beyond kind of thing. But those are just the prologues, okay? Prologue and epilogue. They're short and they're done as poems. I wrote a poem, poetry, that ionic pentameter type stuff. Yeah, good. And that's what these books were all about. These were about getting my author friends and some of our other friends to stretch our muscles a little bit. So in between writing thriller novels, we write short stories. And think about it, a thriller novel, a murder mystery is often about characters being scared. So writing horror stories is not too far different on the spectrum there, okay? As far as am I ready for the Easter Bunny? Absolutely positively ready for the Easter Bunny. So my stories in here, the corner shop. Now the reason why I mention that is because the corner shop is about a couple of not such good people who go to New Orleans and visit a corner shop. I had so much fun writing that story, and some of the characters in there appear in other stories, which I'll mention in a moment. Okay, so we had put out 2 of those horror anthologies, and I really felt like we hit our stride with this one, with Nightmareland. And the reason why I say that is because I was watching some behind-the-scenes thing about the James Bond movies, not the books, the movies. And I believe it was said about the books by the people who were making the movies, if this makes sense, bear with me. They said by the time Ian Fleming wrote the 3rd book of the James Bond series, he felt like he knew what fans wanted and he knew how to deliver it, and he gave them that. And it's kind of the same thing with Dr. No and the first 2 James Bond movies. They really felt like when they got to the 3rd one, which was Goldfinger, that they really felt like they hit their stride. And of course, Goldfinger is an amazing story. Mike Myers parodied it later, and it's just aside from maybe the attire, it holds up. It's still a good story. Okay, so that's why I say with Nightmareland, it was our 3rd one in that anthology. We really felt like we hit our stride. We knew what fans wanted from us as horror writers at that point, and now we were admitting that we were not just mystery writers and thriller writers, but horror writers as well. So I love that cover, right? The girl lost in the woods. And that inspired me to write one of the stories in here. So I'm going to go through real quick and tell you which stories I wrote in here. Now they're all good, or they wouldn't be in here. These are stories that I personally liked. That's why they're in here. So the book is called Nightmareland. The first story is called Nightmareland. And if you want to go through my videos, I actually read this out loud. I think I had to break it up for TikTok, but I think it's full length on YouTube, maybe not. And all these books, by the way, they're all available on Amazon. They're in Kindle Unlimited. They're on Audible, so you can listen to them as audiobooks. But anyway, for this one, I wrote, the first story is called Nightmareland, and that sets up with this girl sneaking out wearing her field hockey sweater, sneaking out to go try this new drug. And all the stories then, it's Nightmareland. So it's induced, it puts you under and it makes you have nightmares. And so you scare yourself is the idea. And so all the stories in here are ostensibly, Jessica is her name, her nightmares that happen while she's on the drug, which you don't necessarily figure that out in the first story, but you do figure it out. And so in here I wrote Passage Key. Passage Key is one of my 2 favorite short stories that I've ever written. I have a lot of fun with short stories, but Passage Key, if you remember COVID, all the kids got sent home, so I was doing homeschooling with my daughter and her friend, and I read them Passage Key. So we're literally sitting right here in my office, my 2 little, what were they? Maybe 8 or 9 at that time? Somewhere around there, okay? No, they were older, 10, let's say. Sitting here on the floor of my office, listening. We're taking a break, and I decided to read them a short story, and they found it really scary. So it was fun reading in real time to an audience, even though it was a couple 10-year-olds, but they liked it. They liked the story, and most people enjoyed the story, so adults and other people other than 10-year-olds. Okay, so Nightmareland in here I wrote, Passage Key I wrote, and then I wrote the end, which is called Concessions. Now what's cool and what I started to do was I would take characters from one book and put them in another book, and you didn't have to read the other books for it to connect, but it's like you get to revisit them, and you'll see that again. So Jessica in here could be related to somebody we'll see in another book, and the characters from the corner shop make another appearance as well. So then for there we went to Spellbound. Now I love this cover. I love the witch. It was a sexier witch at first. She actually had some exposed breast. You can't see it because I covered it up, but I did that. I put some red on it so it looked like she was wearing a red shirt. But in the original, she is slightly exposed, and I thought that was too risque for there's just no reason to go there. So we covered it up. A little inside baseball though, and we went back and forth. So we created a Facebook group for all these authors to talk. We went back and forth a number of times. Is this okay? Is it too much? Some of the people are like, it's fine, the exposed breast. And I was like, it is, but it's not. Why limit our sales? Why let moms look at that and say, I'm not going to let my kid read that, even though they could probably read the stories? Okay, so Spellbound, from the look of it, it's stories about witches. You got the pentagram, you got this lady with the dark robe, you got the book here that looks pretty scary. And I thought, okay, Once again, I was inspired by the image, and I said, what if somebody found a book that had all these spells, and if they read the spell out loud, the thing about the spell happens? So in other words, there's magic books, and if you read the spells, if you're an innocent person and you read the spell, what is contained in the spell will happen, okay? So maybe it's a spell about a dragon, then the dragon will appear somewhere, not necessarily right in front of you. So that was kind of the broad stroke of this story. So in this one, I wrote, again, the book is called Spellbound, so I usually made the first story the same. And this one doesn't have a preface or any of that. It just starts right out with the first story kind of introducing you to what's going on. So Spellbound, I really, really enjoyed that story. It's just a fun story to read about a woman who takes her daughter to visit a witch, saying, my daughter is coming into her powers now, and what do we do? And so that's how it starts. And the elder witch is beautiful. She's a beautiful woman. She's this woman, but in reality, that's her witchcraft working on her. She's actually really old and really ugly and crinkled, and so the witches see that, and the old witch says, who's again the beautiful woman, says, child, are you ready for this kind of, because this is what's going to happen to you by conjuring all this magic. It ages you. And her mom starts to speak, and the old witch is like, no, she has to answer for herself, just as I did when I was her age. So that was kind of fun. Okay, so the stories in here that I wrote Spellbound, then I wrote Fate and Moonlight. All right, stop right there. Fate and Moonlight is, without a doubt, my favorite short story I've ever written, okay? It's scary, it's got eeriness to it, it's got suspense. That one's worth buying this book all by itself. That's a $5 story, okay? Not to pat myself too hard on the back, but we were on vacation, and when I get tired of being at the beach, I'd come in, my wife and daughter would stay down there a little while longer, because I usually went down to the beach a few hours before them, because I wake up early. And so I'd be tired around lunchtime. I'd come in, I'd eat a sandwich, and I'd sit down. I'd get ideas, I'd write, and then we'd all go do things. And then in the evening, when everybody else was winding down and going to sleep, I would work on it some more. So I wrote that one on vacation. I just took my time with it, and I went back and added layers and added things. It was just a really fun story to craft. I'd say it's a well-crafted story, and it delivers on what you want. And like most of my stories, they're almost like Twilight Zone kind of things, or Alfred Hitchcock Presents. If you ever saw those old shows back in the 60s or whenever they're from, I like the little twist, I like the surprise ending, so I try to add that into my stories, okay? So in this one I wrote Spellbound, Fate and Moonlight, which I said is my favorite story. I also wrote High, High and Onward, which is another poem, but it's a horror story poem. I wrote Not Magical Enough, which is a really poignant story about a woman a young lady who, I guess a girl, she's probably a girl, who visits her family home after her mother has died. Her aunt takes her, and she's walking around her house thinking about her mom. Very poignant. I read that one, and it brings a tear to my eye, because it was supposed to bring a tear to your eye. And then is the story called Ends and Beginnings. Ends and Beginnings is basically now what I was doing in these stories, like I did with Nightmareland, I do with Spellbound, I would do a sandwich. So I started off with like a prologue story that was just a story unto itself. Then you'd read the anthology. And then when you get to the end, there's like an epilogue story. But again, it's a story unto itself. But if you read the whole book, you're like, oh, I see this is a sandwich. The story starts here, then all these things happen, and the story, but a new story it's wrapped up. And let me open my computer again, because I wanted to be able to tell you about one on here. This is the next one. Now, I didn't bring it, but the next one in the series is called, so after Spellbound, is called Wings and Fire. Wings ampersand Fire. That's the next one in the series. I don't know why I don't have a copy of it, but I don't. So for that one, I wrote Wings and Fire, which again is a really good short story. It's a lot of these stories, the ones in Spellbound, the ones in Wings and Fire, start out with you think one thing, and then turns out you think another thing. I only wrote 2 for that one. I'll explain why in a minute. And then I wrote The Darkborn. Those 2 series in that book, again, these are all great stories. These are all friends of mine. They all wrote great stories. I enjoy every one of those stories. Like I said, some of them are humorous, but those 2 stories of mine, again, are worth the price of admission for that book. I really enjoy those stories. And then finally, Shadowland. Now, the Shadowland book, so we were doing these annually, these horror anthologies. We were doing them annually as part of a contest. Then we got away from the contest, and I said, the people who have been contributing, we created our own Facebook group. I said, you're the contributors. If we're going to put one out in October, these typically came out in October, you know what to do. Write your story, and I'll give you my feedback, and we'll go from there. But basically, I knew at that point they were all going to be good stories. However, not everybody is available when you want them to be, and not everybody wanted to keep writing horror stories if they were a mystery writer, so maybe they didn't continue to contribute. Some people were in the first couple of ones and came back for later ones. Other people did one every time. And some people, their schedule wouldn't allow them to do it. That's fine. So this was the last one in the series that we did. This is Shadowland. Now, as we were doing them once a year, and then I said, well, these are pretty popular. Maybe we don't have to write one short story once a year. What if we do them 3 times a year? So that was why the last couple of books came out on a little quicker succession, a little faster, one on the heels of the other every 3 months or so. And at that point, I was really busy doing my novels. I was like, even I can write short stories for these things. But they did what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to get exposure for some of these new talents. They were supposed to be fun for other people to do. And they did all that. And I was really spending enough time on my novels and marketing and other things where I was like, okay, even I'm not going to have time. But at what point do you wrap a series? Is 6 books enough? So we had everybody getting busier, which is a good thing. That's what you want. And some people just weren't available, which that happens. Life happens. And so for this one, it's got the most stories from me of any of the books in this anthology. And what I was doing when I did this was I was thinking to myself, maybe I'll just do little horror anthologies, just my stuff, just me. So the Box Under the Bed, which is this is a part of that series. This is the last book in that series. These are me and friends, and the Dark Passages books are just me. Okay, they're all just short story horror anthologies. So Shadowland has some really great stories in it. Now, here's again, I think I've said this before, but I'll say it again. So there are 14 different stories, I think maybe by 12 or so different authors. But there are like 4 other names that are pen names that I used that I wrote these stories. So there's Shadowland, which again, that's the name of the book and that's the name of the first story. And that talks about this Dr. Amental who does a class at a university in Ohio, or a college in Ohio. And this guy, Pelton Berman, Jr., signs up for the class because his dad wants him to, and Pell's been having some issues, and so he's close to home at this college. And Dr. Amental sponsors kids to go anywhere in the world to track down the roots of horror stories. Now, we heard about Dr. Amental in one of my other novels. I got my door to the outside open apparently, and one of my bunnies snuck in, so I don't think they're going to pay a guest visit. But I don't know how they got in. I guess I left the door open. I didn't think I did. I thought I chased them both out, but she's in here. So I chased one out and the other one got in. So Dr. Amental is mentioned as a contributor, a big contributor, to one of the candidates in one of my murder mysteries, Primary Target. And the campaign manager, or assistant campaign manager, Bree Barkley, goes over and talks to Dr. Amental and greets him, and so we're glad to have you, and blah, blah, blah. And of course, we need your money. And she's just all charm, and he loves her. And so that's the guy in this story. That's Dr. Amental. So it starts out with Shadowland. I wrote that. Then I wrote The Prodigy, which is also kind of scary. It takes place in New Orleans because I like the voodoo and stuff in New Orleans. And that one's kind of a surprise ending that waits almost till the end to be surprising. But it is also like a Twilight Zone type of episode, and you'll see that when you read it. Then there's Absentminded, which is listed as so I should say, The Prodigy is listed as being written by Colton Berman. That's the character from the first story, Shadowland, okay? It's his dad, allegedly, wrote this first story. So these are all stories from Dr. Amental's students, is the premise here in this one. Absentminded is by Marjory Mcconaughey, so that's me also under that pen name. And Absentminded, that's a very touching story. That one also makes me tear up a little bit when I read it, just because I know what I was going for in that story, and I feel like I delivered it. And when you're reading, okay, this one's scary, this one's funny, and this one's poignant, it's almost like maybe it might miss the mark, but when you read it just by itself, to me, when I read it, I tear up every time. But I'm maybe a little softy on that. Then there's a story called Cave Dark, which I read that one to my daughter, and she liked it. I was telling my daughter about the story before I wrote it, and she said, yeah, that'll be a good story. So I had a good time writing that one. That one's listed as being by Terrence J. Harkenter. Again, that's one of the kids who's mentioned in the class as being a student. Then there's The Quiet Woods. This was so much fun. I was trying to figure out a new monster, and I came up with, I think, a new monster. But maybe the monster in the castle who's a madman who eats children, maybe that's not a new monster. But so that's Mcconaughey, and that was the best I could do with coming up with a new monster. And so he terrorizes the town from his castle, and that's what that story's about. And of course, Jay Weissman, who is my pen name there for that story, and is one of the college students who's going to investigate the Mcconaughey story. And it's fun, again, nice surprise ending to it, but good. And then finally, the last story that I wrote in this, the last story in this, is Passages, Shadowland Part 2, and that's by me, and that's kind of like wraps up the horror anthology and wraps up the series. So, as I mentioned, there's a couple of, what does it say? Reading me a horror book right before I go to sleep. Well, maybe not the best thing to do there, Linz. Okay, so that's those horror anthologies. So again, the series is great, and if you look at them, these are real books. They're not anything small. The Dark Passages series, though, smaller books. These are, like I said, these are like novella size. And all I was trying to do with these was take 3 or 4 short stories and just cap them together and put them out. So I didn't have to wait for 12 or 14 other authors to finish, and I didn't have to edit 14 other stories. I could just write and edit mine, put it out to my beta readers, get their feedback, and then publish them. Now remember, my beta readers mostly wanted murder mysteries from me, so there was a subset in there that enjoyed the horror stories. And I'm finding that on TikTok and some of the other social media, that there's definitely a market for murder mysteries and thriller novels, thrillers being scary, but in the like psychological thriller. They're not monster stories, but a lot of people think of thrillers as monster stories, especially thanks to Michael Jackson's album called Thriller, which was, involved monsters. So I capitalize those more under horror as a subcategory of thriller, which is a subcategory of mystery. But again, it doesn't matter how I categorize it. These are horror stories, okay? So the Dark Passages series was simply a way for me to, whenever I wanted to write a short story, I would just write it, and whenever I had a handful of them together, I'd pop them out. And what I did was, I think over the summer a few years ago, I just was, like every weekend I'd write a short story, and then the ones that I thought were the best I collected. But I wanted to put them out in a little series, so you could like read 3 or 4, and then you had to wait for the next one a couple of weeks later, and then it came out. It was just like, how you wait for the next series in a comic book and the next episode of a TV show. So I could have put them all into one book, and I would have had one book of Dark Passages, but I kind of already did that with a lot of these other books, right? Especially this one, which I wrote 6 of the 14 stories in there. Instead, what I do is I'll just put these out. They'll be fun. Now, as an author, here's why you don't want to do that. They don't cost much. They're thin, so you don't get much in the way of Kindle Unlimited page reads, so you never really make any money on these books. Still, though, it was fun to do, and I'm glad I did it. So let me tell you a little bit about what's behind these things, okay? So those short stories are popular. Well, I'm glad you think so. I think so. They're fun for me. And here's the thing about short stories. Why it's fun for the author and why it's fun for the reader. So you can sit down and read this in the afternoon. You got a couple hours to kill. You got 20 minutes to kill. You can read one of the stories in here, okay? In an hour, you can read them all. And don't forget, they're on Audible, too. So if you're not going on a road trip where you need 16 hours, you don't want to listen to something every day for an hour a day or 2 hours a day while you're working out and driving and commuting and all this stuff, you can just, do, on your lunch break, pop this in, and 20 minutes later it's done, lunch is over, and you had a fun time. That's what they are. They're appetizers. They're not full novels. So they're fun for the author to take a break from something that he or she may work on for, in my case, 2 or 3 months, other people maybe a year, okay? It's a nice break. Even if in the middle of writing a novel, you take a break and write a short story. And then when you write these short stories, you're building other muscles, you're bringing that suspense and stuff into these little stories. It's a way to sharpen your skills. For the readers, it's a great way for them to sample the style of writing. If you don't like my style of writing in these, you're not going to like it from my other stuff. It's the same guy writing it. But it's also a nice way to reach people who might not pick up your stuff otherwise. I've had lots and lots of people who don't read horror stories, present company excluded, Linz, that I've had lots of people who don't read horror stories who read some of my murder mysteries and said, oh, I like how you write. I think it would be fun to read some of your horror stories. And they do, and they enjoyed them. I've had people who picked up a horror story of mine, loved it, went on to read my novels, went on to read everything else I ever put out, and they're just like, I read everything this guy writes because he's a good writer. And, you know, thank you. That's why I do this, so that you'll read everything I write. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about these and where they came from. So again, the genesis of this was, I'd finished a novel, like right now, I've just finished a novel, I'm done with all the edits, it's coming out next month. It's actually, got a copy of it right here. Killer in the Dark, just showed up, okay? So I finished this a little while ago, and before I start the next one, which technically I already started the next one, to take a little break, I would write a short story. That's historically what I did. This time I have some stuff going on with my Young Authors Club, so I don't have to worry about a palate cleanser for that. So let me tell you a little bit about what these stories are. So this one's called Dark Passages. The series is called Dark Passages, and the first story in here is called The Gemwa Jew. So that's a monster I made up. These guys, so you know how they used to explore for the pyramids and stuff and explore lands was they would take a map, they would, like Lewis and Clark, they just kind of go do it without a map. And they're using compasses and sextants and stuff. So now we got planes, then we got satellites, now we have LiDAR, which is they can penetrate with like ground radar through the jungle and see there's hills and stones and this and that, stone walls. So this is about, the Gemwa Jew is a story about people who did it right before LiDAR started showing everybody where possible pyramids could be. And they go to South America and they discover as yet unknown pyramid and they explore it, and then they have problems with what happens afterwards. The Best Monday Ever is kind of a humorous, it's a dark humor, it's kind of a funny story. It's not laugh out loud funny, but it's kind of humorous. And then Dark Questions is one of those, what's going on, like Saw. You wake up and you're like, what the hell's going on? And maybe influenced by Saw a little bit, to be perfectly honest. Never thought about that until just now. So short stories, of the three, the best one, and this one is The Gemwa Jew. I wrote it. This is one of the few stories that I wrote and then rewrote entirely, and then kind of went back to the first version and rewrote it to make it more of what it originally was. And I don't do that very often. I did it for that one. I won't say the story is better for it. I think the original version I came up with was good, and when I rewrote it the second time, I made it more of what it was originally, and I'm very happy with it. The second version, I think, was a mistake to rewrite, and I don't usually rewrite. That's why, because I like my initial vision, and I usually have pretty good instincts for that. This one, Dark Voodoo. This is probably my favorite book in this series, okay? This is about some people who go to New Orleans and go to that little corner shop that I referenced in the Box Under the Bed books. So this one is called, the stories in this one are The Rendering, Countenance, and then the last one is called Epilogue. This is a great little book. It doesn't cost much. It won't take you long to read. Actually, it does kind of cost a little bit. It's maybe a little pricey for only getting 3 short stories. It's well worth it. These are great stories. I had such a good time writing these stories, and I love the fact that I referenced the corner shop and the horror anthologies from the Box Under the Bed, and some of the characters in those stories appear in my paranormal thriller called A Place of Shadows. This one's good. All 3 stories take place in New Orleans. All 3 of them revolve around that corner shop, and all 3 are pretty good. The next one was called Dark Thoughts. Again, skinny little guy. This one, by the way, the cover art on this one, I think, is really, really good. This one, when I look at this, it looks like the lady hung herself because of the way this bar comes down right there, like right there. So that's why I liked it, even though that's not what it is. She's not hanging herself. That's not what happens. It's just kind of, I'm having a hard time with this light. It's just kind of ghostly looking, especially with the blue and all that. But this one, I love this. That red eye, the cracked face. Is it a person? Is it a painting? And then if you look at the lettering's done the same way. They all are done this way because I picked the covers out first. I picked the covers out all at the same time. So this one, 3 short stories all about that same voodoo shop, and probably the best cover for this series. All right, so back to this one. This is Dark Thoughts. This has the monster and the maintenance man. How many books have you written so far? I have over 50 titles. Now, you got to remember, some of them are skinny little wafers like this guy, so that counts. It's a book. and I wrote some short stories with my daughter that were illustrated, called The Zombunny, little horror stories actually. She wrote The Princess and the Dog. No. She wrote about the mermaid, Laguna, the Lonely Mermaid. She wrote that. She told that story to me when she was 4 years old, so I wrote it down for her, and we had a friend illustrate it. That's another one of those books. So I have, on my own, I have 50 titles. You're so attractive, sir. Well, thank you. You're my new best friend. What else did I miss in here? When did you start? When did I start writing? So that's a tough question. I started putting books out maybe with cookbooks. You know, you start how you start. I was working on cookbooks with a health nut friend, and got a lot of his input. Then I started writing family humor anecdotes, and they didn't sell well because it's kind of a tough niche. And then I wrote a romance and stuff. My point is that I probably started like 10 years ago, but I didn't really make a push. A few years ago, I wrote Double Blind, which is like right there, Double Blind. And I wrote my first murder mystery, and things kind of took off from there. So now I'm a full-time author. And it's not like I hit a home run. It was just a lot of work. But that's how most things are. What's my favorite genre to write? You know, so I love writing these little short horror stories, but I don't necessarily want to spend 2 or 3 months writing a big complicated horror novel. I think I could, and maybe one day I will. I wrote a paranormal thriller, which I'm very proud of. It's a pretty long book. It's called A Place of Shadows, if you buy it on ebook, as an ebook. And I really enjoy it a lot. But I would say the genre I enjoy the most, personally the one I like, is humor. I wrote a story. It was originally called Poggy Bonsi. We changed it to The Italian Assistant. It's full of sex, so all kinds of sex scenes from a guy's point of view too. So a lot of women were like, I didn't care for it. But it's a comedy, and it's so outrageously funny. And one of my favorite characters ever that I created for that, her name is Sam, and she's just crazy, and all kinds of madcap things happen. And I love writing that kind of stuff. I like to joke around as a person. But the ones that sell best are the murder mysteries. So my Double Blind series is the best selling one. And so it's hard to say I like the ones that don't sell. I do like to write them. They're fun for me, and it's fun to make somebody laugh. It's equally, remember I told you the bunnies were in here? One just came over and gave me a kiss. But the reason I like the murder mysteries, Double Blind, and that series back here, and this is my medical thriller series, and the new Jett Thacker series, if I pan this way, Tiffany Lynn is Missing. The reason I like those is because I can write a book that will entertain everybody. I can have it be popular, I can have it sell, and I can still have 1 or 2 quirky little side characters that allow me to have my little humorous outlet, like Tyree. His nickname is Big Brass. He's a fun character. Not Tyree, Big Brass, Levante, not Tyree. Big Brass, his name is Levante in the Double Blind books, and he's a fun character. So I just figured I have my little outlet here and there, just like I always use the example. I'm sorry you don't like this live blows. Sorry you don't like it. Feel free to tune out. Nobody put a gun to your head to make you join. So it allows me to have that outlet, and I can always write a humor story if I want, and maybe I should do those under a pen name or something. But so, well, thank you. I'm glad you think that's awesome. I love hearing from writers who push through the hard times and make it a full-time job. Yep, it's definitely full-time. Thank you, JC. Good to see you here. All right, so getting back to this real quick. So The Monster and the Maintenance Man. This is a story that I wanted to tell from, it's a narrative story. So it's like, if I write a murder mystery, the way it's written, the reader is like watching a movie. Okay, you see different characters doing things, and excuse me, you're usually in the point of view, or you may have the internal thoughts of one of the characters. And then maybe if that character's not in that scene, if you go to a different scene, maybe you get the internal thoughts of a different character. But it's more like, standing back watching a movie happen. With The Monster and the Maintenance Man, it's a narrative story. So in other words, it's like when you would sit down with your friends around a campfire and they would say, well, this one time I went and I did this, that, and the other. Okay? It's just a different way of telling a story. And so I did the story that way. I did a talk to text of this. I had the idea, and I talked to text the whole thing, and I narrated it to myself as a old, broken down old man with a crusty voice, and excuse me, and then I took those notes and I wrote the whole story, and I made sure that dialect was in there. So the reason I mention all this is because when I was looking at narrators for all these different books, somebody who auditioned for Dark Voodoo had the exact voice I wanted for the monster and the maintenance man. So I wrote him back and I said, I love your reading. I emailed him the story. I said, I want you to audition for this book. And if you do it the way you did your audition for that one, you got the job. So I love how, and I think it was a British guy. And so there's 3 stories in here. The second one is called a #1 best-selling author, which is kind of a humorous, it's dark humor. And the third one is The Seer. And that's kind of a true story based on true events, let's say, of a kid who's afraid to go in his grandma's basement, which I was terrified to go in my grandma's basement. Not during the day, but at night, because they lived up in Ohio. It was dark and there were cobwebs. And, it's like, go get us some more Pepsi. And it's like, anyhow, so this guy reads The Monster and the Maintenance Man on Audible. It is absolutely positively exactly what I had in my head. Now, no slight against the people who do my other books. Sky Stafford has done an amazing job for me narrating. She's narrated most of my novels, okay? But I wanted to change things up. I wanted some different voices. So Sky does a beautiful job for me on my novels. The guy who did The Monster and the Maintenance Man on Audible, he reads that story the way I wanted that story read. So if you have the choice, love for you to buy the book, but jump over to Audible and listen to him narrate The Monster and the Maintenance Man. It is exactly what I wanted in the Audible. And most of my Audible stories, the people really do a good job and they nail it. But sometimes they do it different from what I imagined, and they do a better job than what I would have, what I had in my head. And a lot of time they're actors and stuff. They're like voice actors, but they're also sometimes actors. Like especially during COVID, there was a lot of actors who couldn't work, so they bought microphones and put up a studio and did narration. And I got 1 or 2 of those to work for me. And they really do a good job. So Audible books are fun, but now you're listening to somebody else's delivery of the performance. When you read it yourself, you decide how creepy that guy's voice is or whatever. And so so The Monster and the Maintenance Man, it's a fun story. It's got a little levity here and there in it. It's not a humor story, but I really enjoy that one a lot. And the last one in that series is Dark Intent, which has also 3 stories. This one has the power outage. I love this story. If I was going to do a horror novel, this would be the story I would base it on, because the characters I created in this are worthy of that. They had depth, they had range. If you read that story, you'll see, I can see what he was talking about. That's where that could go. Then there's a poem, Tonight We Hunt the Beast Lads. I don't know why, just sometimes I like to write a poem. It's a good poem. And as always, it's got a nice surprise twist. And then the last story in this one is called A Settled Matter. It's also dark humor. It's, again, kind of a narrative story. It's a good story. It's dark humor. It's fun. But in this one, there's no doubt about it. My favorite one in this one is The Power Outage. It's kind of a vampire story. And it's a good story. And it's also got some, and I don't base all my stories on real events, but that one's got a moment where he refers to being out on a boat where it was dark, and that little segment that they refer to in there is actually happened to me, my wife and I. Is it expensive to have someone read your book on Audible? It can be. So there's a couple different ways to go. There's one where you hire somebody and maybe they charge $3,000 or $5,000. Some of them you can get for less. Maybe you can get somebody for $1,000 to read your book. And then you've paid that cost, and then you have the rights. So all the revenue or all the royalties that come in after that, you own. You can also do a royalty share. So ACX, which is the Amazon wing that does this, takes 20%. The other 80% you split half and half. So you get 40%, and the narrator comes on to take a piece of the action, is how I call it. So I'm gonna decline. People are trying to join the call. I appreciate that, but I'm actually getting ready to wrap this up. And if you want to hit me up for a message, or if you had a question or something, just go on one of my videos and put the comment there. I'll see it. Or if you have something else you wanted me to talk about, go to my website, danalatorre.com. There's a little thing that says contact me. Drop it there. That goes straight to I get all my email. It comes straight to my email. I read all those. I reply to all of them. But anyway, so there's the revenue share, and you can search for a lot of different narrators that way. And that's what I do. When I would place a book on Audible, a lot of people, here's what happens. I'll make this real quick. A lot of new authors, when they place their book on Audible, they put it out there and they wait. That's all they do. What I did when I was new, I come from a sales background, I would put my book out there, and then I would go and I would I would listen to a bunch of narrators, and anybody I thought could do a good job, I would message them and say, I loved your sample here on this story, that story. I think it'd be good for the one I just did. Would you have a look at it? So instead of me, you'll hear horror stories about, oh, my book was out there for 3 months, I never got an audition, whereas I usually have 30 auditions inside of 24 hours. Now it happens because my books are a little more well-known and people can see my books on Audible. There's, dozens of them on Audible. But when I was just starting out, I would solicit people, for lack of a better phrase. I would just contact them and say, hey, are you interested? And I might contact 30 or 40 people, and maybe 10 would respond, and of those, maybe 5 would audition, and of those, I usually would find a good narrator. But that made my window shrink to 3 or 4 days, instead of people were putting them out there saying, I can't get anybody to audition. It's like, yeah, they've got 10,000 titles popping up on their screen. View it from their side. But how would you feel if you're a narrator looking for work? How would you feel if the author contacted you and said, I love this sample you put up, because they put up samples, like they put up 5 or 6 samples on their ACX. You click on their name, like you're looking for an American accent, melodramatic, male or female, blah, 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 a certain age range, and dramatic style of reading, whatever you want to call it. And then it'll bring up, here's people who did that. So you can find them. So imagine you're one of those people and you get an invitation from the author. Well, some people are very busy and they don't have time for that. Other people are like, well, I only work certain ways, or I only work in certain genres. Great. Other people are like, hey, I'm new, I need a chance. And I always felt like I was getting people, most of the time it seemed like I was getting people who were eager and willing to have skin in the game, so to speak, where they were basically working on commission. Help me sell this book, because I was new and they were new. And other people are like, well, I need to get paid for my time. I'm like, yeah, me too. I wrote this whole book for free, hoping it would sell. So now I'm out there paying ads to get it to sell. So now I hope to make money in the long run. So I didn't usually work with those people, although I have. I just want to be paid up front. And so revenue share worked out really well for me. I still believe in it a lot, because I like to give some of those newer people a chance. What's the difference between, pick an actor, Matthew Mcconaughey. What's the difference between his skills today versus the first movie you ever heard of him in versus a week before he did that first movie you ever heard of him in? Still a pretty talented guy. He learned a lot. But the first movies where he was good, a year before that he was good too, you just never heard of him. So I always feel like I'm able to find some people who are right on the verge of breaking out and doing great things. They have the talent, and I like to hire them for that reason. I've hired some Broadway people as well who did a great job, and I know people who only spend $3,000 or $5,000 on a narrator to do their book, and and they're happy with that. I'm a little more. I want to get a quality job, but I also want to help if I can give somebody a break to help them do it. And there have been many people who went on with a career in narration who I was their first book. So it's like friends for life, and how good does that make me feel that I helped them break into the business? So I can tell you, it makes me feel good. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. If you have any more questions, ask them quick. To answer your question, it doesn't have to cost anything. If you do a revenue share, it's zero cost out of pocket. Sorry, it took me kind of went a circuitous route to get to that answer. So if you have any other questions, I'm gonna wrap this up in a sec. Either ask them real quick, I'll get them answered real quick. But if you didn't get a chance to ask, just drop over to one of my videos and ask your question there. I'll see it and I will get back to you. What else I'm going to do, if you missed any of this and you want to catch some of it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to download this and save it onto YouTube. I'm going to see if I can save it onto Spotify. I haven't quite worked out all the kinks there yet. Still working on that one. Actually, I think what I'm supposed to do with Spotify is turn on Spotify and put on my headset with a microphone and do it that way. I forgot. So I'd be talking into the camera, but I'd be recording the other way. Oops. All right. Didn't do that. So this one probably won't be on Spotify, but I'll do another one soon that will be. Just got to remember to do it that way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut them up into a couple of YouTube's TikTok segments so that I can tell you a little bit about these books without it being, an hour-long endeavor. If I can do that. Maybe I can't do that. But in either case, it'll be on YouTube, probably, let's say, within an hour or so. So if you missed anything, you can catch it there. Thanks a lot for joining the live session. I hope you found that beneficial. There's a little bit about where some of these stories came from, why I wrote them, and how much I enjoyed them. And I hope you found it beneficial. This podcast, by the way, is brought to you by Killer in the Dark. This comes out now in paperback and hardback. It's available right now. The ebook comes out May 15th. It is the second book in the Jett Thacker series. The first one is Tiffany Lynn is Missing. It is absolutely positively my favorite book series right now. And I think if you pick up Tiffany Lynn is Missing, you're going to be chomping at the bit or champing at the bit to get Killer in the Dark. And I'm working on the third book in that series right now. Thanks again for joining me, everybody. Oh, and thank you for the roses. I appreciate that. But it's not necessary. You don't need to send me presents. Your presence is what I appreciate. But thank you for that. I do appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon.